Solomonster, it's me, Noah the Mark, and I have an audio question for you. And it's funny because Bray Wyatt just tweeted something similar to this, and I was thinking about asking you this. And my question is, here in 2019, how would you define the roles of a face and a heel? What is the definition of a face and a heel in 2019? Because I'm not really sure.
I don't think you can. There's no one definition for either one. I mean, those lines have been blurred so much. I don't even really know anymore what constitutes just a solid heel or a solid babyface. A year ago, I dug up this quote. Cody was asked about this on Twitter. Are you a heel or are you a face? What are you supposed to be? And his reply was, I'm just a wrestler. Those labels don't exist anymore. Crowd and context are different every single time. I disagree with this notion that those labels don't exist anymore. They do. I think they do. You know, to me, it's not unlike any Marvel movie you would go see where you have heroes and you have villains. That's how I have always looked at pro wrestling. In AEW, you look at somebody like an MJF, and you can see some truth in what Cody is saying. I could see why he would feel that way. MJF walks around as a prick. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He wakes up as a prick. He goes to bed as a prick. He eats breakfast as a prick, lunch, dinner. That's just who he is. But he calls Cody on TV his best friend. And he came to his aid 2 weeks ago when he was getting beaten up. And he got the biggest reaction of anybody on the show that night. But I read that live report that David submitted earlier that I read during the AEW portion of the podcast. He was at the show in Philly. And one of his criticisms was that his girlfriend, who is not a big wrestling fan, but she came along to watch, she was very confused by who to cheer for, who to boo, and he felt, his criticism of AEW was, he felt that they needed to do a better job of defining those roles. Otherwise, it could just muddy the crowd reactions, and you don't want to end up in a situation where people are sitting on their hands because they don't know who to get behind. I would define those roles as... And again, I don't have a clear-cut definition for you, but I would define them as a heel being somebody who, takes shortcuts to win, who has qualities that make them genuinely unlikable, someone you don't want to see succeed, or someone you would gladly pay money to see them get their asses handed to them. Those are all definitions of what I feel make up a good heel or a good villain in wrestling. A good babyface is the opposite. It's somebody you naturally gravitate to, someone you enjoy watching. Maybe they have a great underdog story, or maybe they're not an underdog. Maybe they're the opposite. Maybe they're 6'8", 300 pounds, but they're fun to watch. They're cool. They make a connection in some way with the audience. You look forward to seeing them on your TV. You want to see them succeed. You want to see them be the champion. Steve Austin, he blurred that line because he would cuss people out. He would flip them off, but he was the everyman. Black boots, black trunks, drinks beer, uses foul language. Who among us does not like doing all of these things? And people were able to relate to that. He was being held down by his evil corporate overlords, something that people could relate to. In AEW, people can't necessarily relate to somebody in a dinosaur mask who's supposed to be 65 million years old, but he's befriended this kid more than half his size in Jungle Boy. He's almost like his protector in a way. People like Jungle Boy, and so they like Luchasaurus too. Plus, Luchasaurus is a great athlete who can do cool things in the ring that a guy that big shouldn't be able to do. So he's over. He's one of the most over acts, I think, in the entire company, and he has yet to make a single appearance on their TV show. But I agree that it's a lot harder to define those roles in wrestling today, and the number one reason that a lot of fans have rejected, I think, the top pushed babyfaces in WWE like Roman Reigns in the past, or right now Seth Rollins. He's starting to get that heat a little bit. Although Rollins doesn't get the boo bird treatment like Roman Reigns did or John Cena did. Not yet. But the reason is because it's the way they're booked. The things they say. They don't come off as cool. They don't come off as genuine. People can see right through that. They can see through terrible scripted, shitty dialogue. They can see through bad booking. And unfortunately, the talents are the ones who end up paying for the sins of the promoter. Because Vince McMahon's going to just move on to the next guy, and he'll be around 10 years from now, 80-something years old, sitting in the gorilla position. But what happens if you screw up a Bray Wyatt? What happens if you screw up a Seth Rollins? What happens if you screw up a Chad Gable? They may never recover. Roman Reigns, he still gets booed. It's not as bad as it used to be. But he had years of this, and it wasn't even his fault. He was the product of poor decision making. He was the product of bad booking, bad timing with the whole Daniel Bryan thing, whatever it was. He paid a price. It was very unfair because it wasn't his fault. But it's true. The talent ends up paying for the sins of the promoter. And that's what we're seeing right now with Seth Rollins. He burned down the Firefly Funhouse. The Firefly Funhouse is one of the few segments people seem to enjoy on those shows. That's why he was booed out of the building at the end of the show last Monday. I also think it's a lot harder to be a good babyface than it is to be a good heel for two reasons. You're allowed a lot more latitude when it comes to being the bad guy on TV, but it's also really hard to find those stars that people can not only embrace, like they did Daniel Bryan a few years ago, or Kofi Kingston earlier this year, but to stay invested in those people. That's a very hard thing to do. People have a short attention span. There's only so much TV time. You go from one guy to the next. For somebody to latch on, for the audience to latch on to one person and to, scream their asses off for them and buy their merch and really support them and stick with them and not be fickle and turn on them in 3 months, that's a hard quality to find. That's very rare these days. But that's why someone like a Daniel Bryan stands out. Because the people just took to him. And he could have been the next big thing. And then unfortunately for him, he got hurt. His body betrayed him and he had to retire. And then he came back, which was a great story. And maybe he can get back to that point. That's what I mean. I was talking earlier. I don't know if the idea is to still possibly turn him heel, what they're going to do with him and Roman Reigns, when they're going to finally have their match. But if he's back as a babyface for good, there's a story there that you can tell and you can get the people into it between Daniel Bryan going for that championship and trying to slay the beast at WrestleMania. It's the same story I was pitching for before WrestleMania 30. Here we are going into WrestleMania 36. What's old is new again. I still think that story works because when he comes out, the people they love Daniel Bryan. He's not some babyface that they look at and go, man, this guy is just regurgitating scripted, forced, hokey bullshit. I don't believe him. I don't like him. They like him. They like him. There's something about him. He's the scrappy underdog and he just comes across as a genuine personality. He's got something that a lot of other guys in this company just don't have.